Hey everybody, again, welcome to Optimism 101 with Coco, the optimist dog. He's the little ray of sunshine. Anyway, so I wanted to answer the questions that I posed to you and that I shared with you on the stories of my account last week about optimism and its relation to income, education, and sex. And so first I wanted to share a little brief stats. I know, statistics, numbers, a lesson. And that is about correlation and associations and how things are related. So there could be positive relationships, negative relationships, or no relationships. When there's no relationship, if something happens, it has nothing to do with something else. So the fact that somebody has, let's say, a big head does not correlate or is not related to how smart they are, or the color of their eyes is not related to how smart they are, for example. A negative correlation is when something is related to something else, but as one thing increases, the other one decreases. So for example, with optimism, if an example of a negative relationship would be in some countries, in some cultures, as you age, the older you get, the less optimistic you are, and that usually happens in Eastern cultures. That's a negative relationship. And then there's positive relationships, like in Hispanics, where the older you get, the more optimistic you are. So both move in the same direction. So when it comes to relationship of optimism and income, there's differences in income. So people who make more money tend to be more optimistic than people who make less money. And this doesn't have to do anything necessarily with the accessibility to resources, or meaning that if you have money, you automatically are going to be optimistic. But again, when we're developing our personalities, environmental factors are important, just as genetic factors are. And as a trait, a universal trait for that matter, optimism, then the more resources you all have of income, of education, because it's the same case for education. More educated people are more optimistic than less educated people. You're going to have more resources to attain the goals in the future that you set out to accomplish. Whereas people who with less resources might have goals, might have expectations about the future, but they face challenges that people with more income, more education, and often more privilege don't necessarily have to face. Does that mean that people with less resources are pessimistic? Not necessarily. And then in regards to sex or differences in sex and optimism or pessimism, there's none. There's no significant difference between males or females in how optimistic or pessimistic they are. So basically, it's just equally likely that a man or a female is going to be optimistic or pessimistic or not. And then finally, what I wanted to share with you is, being that May is Mental Health Awareness Day, is what ways do you think that optimism actually has to do or is related to mental health? How can optimistic or pessimistic people cope with issues that have to do with mental health disorders? And what, if any, mental health disorders are associated with people being optimistic or pessimistic? So I leave you with that question, and also a little question that somebody asked from last time about, they say that they're optimistic but they're also pessimistic, and that the pessimism gets in the way of their optimism. So what can they do? So I'm going to ask you, what would you do if that was the case for you? Or what do you think could be done if that is the case? Because that also could probably have to do with our mental health, our anxiety levels, or depression levels, and so on. So I hope you enjoyed this class of Optimism 101, and see you next week.